Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Crazy Stupid Marketing Show, the show where we talk about all the crazy, stupid stuff that people do in marketing and how you cannot do crazy, stupid things, but instead do smart, meaningful, awesome things that are going to help you take your marketing wherever you want that to go. And today, I'm really interested. I'm really excited about this conversation because we're taking like a little spin on normal conversation, and we're talking about like the marketers ourselves. So instead of like marketing efforts or marketing KPIs or channels or tactics or any of those things, we're talking about what does it look like to be a world-class marketer. And as you might imagine, if you've watched this show before, there's probably some underlying human ways of being that we're going to talk about today that don't make you a world-class marketer, but could probably make you a world-class whatever it is that you want to be. But as most of you are here for some marketing info, we are going to specifically look at what it looks like to harness those things into our careers as marketers. So regardless of whether you are just the beginning of your marketing career, you're somewhere in the middle and you're trying to figure out like, where am I going to go with this? Maybe you're already reached the quote unquote pinnacle and you're like, is this it for me? There's room in this conversation for all of us. Maybe you're an entrepreneur who's tuning into the show who really doesn't identify as a marketer, but would love to do world-class marketing. Wherever you fit, this is perfect. You are welcome here precisely as you are. And if you have specific questions or quandaries from your perspective, this is what this fancy little chat mechanism is for. So if you are joining us live, we would love for you to get into the chat. Let us know that you're here. Share your questions, share your perspectives on becoming a world-class marketer. And together, we can all leave at the end of this 45 minutes. Let's be honest, it's usually closer to an hour conversation. Being a little bit more world-class than when we start. So for those of you who don't know Simon is all about being world-class. And so I'm really excited to have him as part of the conversation today. So Simon, before we get kicked off, can you tell us a little bit about you, what brought you to where you are today, and why you're so passionate about helping people become world-class?
Okay, yes. First off, I'm not a marketer, so I'm hoping that
we love on this show. By the way,
good. Because my marketing knowledge is tiny.
I wouldn't have invited you. I'll bring the marketing knowledge. You bring the world-class knowledge.
Fantastic. So my background is sports psychology. Traditionally, that meant working with sports teams and athletes, helping them get their mental game right. But honestly, my real passion and the thing that drives my curiosity is understanding how the best in the world think, how they've become the best in the world, what they do differently, how they solve problems differently, how they respond to challenges differently. And so for the best part of 30 years, I've been working with and studying world record breakers, world champions, Olympic medalists, but also lots of people outside of sport who are the very best in the world at what they do. And just looking for those common themes. I'm really interested to see what commonalities you would find in world-class operators who are in vastly different fields from each other. So over the years, when I studied world-class individual performers, I took, some athletes, but the leader of a world-renowned science and medical research organization, and a Michelin star chef, and a mountaineer, and a polar explorer, and a world barista champion, all sorts of people. And I was looking for those differentiators, those things that make these people stand out. So that's really where my curiosity drives me, takes me.
Oh, well, and I'm sure we're going to learn some things about what that looks from a marketing perspective. But Simon, what would you be able to, through all this research, what would you be able to share with us? And like, what are the consistent things across industries, across titles, across whether or not you're working with teams or individually that makes somebody world-class?
Well, when I look at the mindset required for it, there are some simple ingredients. And over time, and it's taken me a long time, it's taken me decades to sort of reduce and condense what I initially thought were a dozen things or 8 things into just a handful that you will always tend to find. And in terms of mindset, it's focus, desire, and freedom. Those 3 are absolutely critical if we want to perform at our best and if we want to become exceptional in our field. And they sound really simple. They actually are pretty simple, but they're also incredibly rare. It's easy to talk about focus, but when I look at those who really, really are focused, there aren't many of them.
Right.
And when you find them, they tend to be amongst the best in the world at what they do.
Right. Okay, let's dive into this from a marketing point of view, because I feel like we are also an industry where we talk a lot about focus, and then we get very distracted by doing many things, and which innately is not focus. So like in your study of this, like what are there some common things that distract people from focus? And then are there any like practices that you've seen that can get people out of distraction back into focus?
Yeah, there are loads of things that distract us. But the really interesting thing is, one of the early things I learned about focus follows interest. Interest follows what we care about. And it's really difficult to be distracted by something that we're not interested in.
Right.
And the problem is the thing that we are interested in may not be the thing we should be focusing on. So I talk to people a lot about that phenomena. You're trying to do a piece of work, your phone goes bleep, and if you're not really interested in what you're doing, whoosh, your attention's right on your phone. And as soon as you get lost in that and you start scrolling, an hour goes by, whatever it is. But equally, I think lots of people, for very good reasons, are kind of like their effort gets dispersed. It's almost like scattergun approach and not sniper, because they don't quite know what works and what doesn't. And the trap then is, and I often get people to sort of write 3 columns on a page. Write down the stuff that absolutely definitely works and the stuff that absolutely definitely doesn't work, and then in the middle the stuff that might work. And the problem is the might column is huge. And then people do everything on it because they're scared that if they miss something out, it might be one of the things that really does work. I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a marketing director who said, I can categorically tell you that 50% of everything that we do is completely ineffective. It just doesn't work. The problem is I can't tell you which 50%. And that's what people get caught in. So there are lots of very, very busy fools out there, and not because they're deliberately getting distracted or they're not even sort of careless about it, really. They're trying to do a good job, but they don't really know what works and what doesn't.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about this then process. We kind of need to go through a process to figure out what does work, but also have the mindset that I'm like giving myself permission, or I'm being like risky enough to not do something that might actually work. Because also in that learning process, then I do identify that like, oh, I did need to do that thing. Now I can move it to the works column. But sometimes you can't do that if you don't move it out of the maybe column. Is that something you find, or?
Yeah. And the first exercise, if you've got these 3 columns, is to really start interrogating the maybe column and committing either it's going to go into the definitely does or definitely doesn't column. I'm going to shift it. And if I'm still there going, I don't know, well, the question is, well, what evidence would you need to have to tell you either it does work or it doesn't work? How would you need to test this thing to know whether it does or it doesn't work? And once we can start doing that and we can start shifting things, it becomes an awful lot easier. And there's another little technique or approach that I've found over the years is difficult, but it's really effective. And that's to put things in rank order. So rank order, you can only have one number 1 in rank order. So if I'm looking at a to-do list, for example, and I apply this thinking to it, if I could only do one thing today, what would it be? If I had some time and space and could do a second thing, what would that be? If I still had some time left and a bit of energy and everything else, and I could do a third thing, what would it be? forget time for a minute. It's not about how long this thing takes. It's about how effective it is,
Right.
how much impact it's going to have.
Mm-hmm.
So if you could only do one thing, what would it be? If you could do a second, what would it be? If you could do a third, what would it be? And on that basis, we can start to really scrutinize this to-do list. And people often say that I'm not a fan of to-do lists. It's not quite true. What I'm not a fan of is an unfiltered to-do list, a brain dump that becomes a things to-do list.
Right.
Because that does lead to people becoming very, very busy, unfocused, probably burned out after a while, because it's like they're going around on a hamster wheel. All the effort's going in, but they're not moving very fast. They're not moving forward very quickly. They're just going round and round and round.
Right. Yeah.
So
I think this is really interesting because, one, I think as humans, like the place where we're at in terms of society, people love hustle. They love busy. We're like constant. We like high five ourselves for the amount of things that we get done, but then people feel exhausted and yelling at their spouse and yelling at their kids. And like, it's not leading to good work in the long term either. And I don't know if it is like anchored in the like 8-hour workday, or I'm sure it's anchored in a bunch of things that have like created this pattern for us. But I think it's really interesting to look at things from a rank order perspective in terms of effectiveness, not based on time. And then also like kind of creates time freedom. And you mentioned freedom as part of the mindset, being able to like have space to explore and think and even like move things from one category to the other. And if we have filled all of our space with things to do, which I always like, I tell people this all the time. If you're looking for things to do will present themselves. Right?
Yeah,
you wander around your house, then this is dirty and the dish needs to go here and the laundry needs to be moved. And like, you could fill your entire day doing it. But if we're not actually like coming back to this focus on the effectiveness, and maybe even let's talk about this, because I just did a blog post on measurement. So I'd be interested to hear from a measurement perspective. Like what my brain is saying right now is, what if we were actually measuring like the percentage of activities that we do that are effective versus like the overall number of activities that we do. And if we could say like, I don't believe in 100%, but if we could say like 95%, or like maybe that's even aggressive, 85% of the activities that we're doing, we know contribute to stuff. And today we're at like maybe 50, as you said, like maybe what might that look like if we're going to move from maybe 50%, because we're not sure it's 50%, to like an 85% effectiveness rate. And maybe we could even spend less time doing that on an ongoing basis. This just seems like a smart move, but I might be missing something.
And sometimes we just need some frameworks through which to understand this. So many years ago, I was working in sport. I was working in the Olympic programs with Team GB Olympians. One of the swimmers that I was working with had a real challenge. He was stressed out. He was doing a lot of hours training in the pool, and he had all sorts going on around it. And he came into the little office that I was using for a session, a sports psych session. And I said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Oh, I'm really, really stressed," and started reeling off all the stuff that he had to do. And my reply back to him was, because he was a 100-meter swimmer in a 50-meter pool. My reply back was, "But your job's just to swim 2 lengths of the pool as fast as you can, isn't it?" And initially he took offense at it a little bit. He sort of thought I was trying to belittle his job. And I said, no, it's not less important, but I think it's simpler than you're making it. And it was a little bit of a light bulb moment. In fact, it was a fairly big light bulb moment for us, if I'm honest. Because from that point onwards, he started to really scrutinize his training program. Right. So he asked the question, does the thing I'm doing now actually help me swim 2 lengths of the pool quicker?
Right.
And on that basis, he ditched 2/3 of his training program, 2/3 of everything that he'd always done. and all the things that his coach had always done. And his coach had been coaching swimming for years and had European champions and all that sort of stuff. And so 2/3 went in the bin. And he asked questions like, and he talked to his team. So he would ask the strength and conditioning coach, why do I lie on my back on a bench and push a bar that way when breaststroke I pull the water this way? And the S&C coach said, I don't know. He said, well, why am I doing it then? And the answer was, because everybody does it.
Right.
And he said, but does it help me swim quicker? No, probably not. In that case, I'm not doing it anymore. Right. So, and he looked at how many meters he was swimming in the pool. He was swimming 60 to 70,000 meters a week in the pool. And he said, do all of those help me swim 2 lengths of the pool quicker?
Right.
No, they don't. So 2/3 went in the bin. And that means that you can now ask yourself, how do I best use that time, effort, energy, and focus? So he thought, well, I know I'm not really streamlined. I've got a degree in my hips that I need to iron out almost. How do I do that? Well, stretching, yoga, maybe physio work. That's what I should be doing. I should be spending more time on my start to make my start quicker, more time on my turns. And I asked him one day, I said, just tell me the top 5 things that you need to do to swim 2 lengths of the pool as fast as possible. And when I asked him that question, he looked at me and he went, what do you mean just 5? I said, just the top 5, the 5 that have the biggest impact. Because one of his challenges, going back to what we were saying earlier, he was a really professional, really diligent swimmer, which means that if you'd have asked him write down everything you could do to get quicker, he'd have written hundreds of things down. Right. And then he's going to try and do hundreds of things. Right. So I said, the 5 that have the biggest impact on your performance, what are they? And he said, okay, I need to start fast. And then I need a fast but efficient first length. If it's only fast, I'm not going to have the energy to come back. So fast but efficient first length. Really quick turn around the wall. Then I need to hold the speed for as long as I can on the second length and then touch the wall with 2 hands. Because if I don't in breaststroke, I get disqualified. So I wasted everything else. Right. But okay, cool. That's what we're going to focus on. Doing those 5 things exceptionally well. If it doesn't contribute to those 5 things, we're not doing it. And all of a sudden, he starts to liberate time, energy, headspace. And now he can redirect all of that onto swimming 2 lengths of the pool as fast as possible and nailing these 5 things, the 5 keys, as we called them. Right. And that became really revolutionary for him. He went from being not really even in the British team, real sort of fringe swimmer in the UK, to being a double Olympian, an Olympic finalist, double Commonwealth champion, double Commonwealth record holder, actually finished 7th fastest in history in the 100-meter breaststroke. And when he looks at what changed, he didn't get any taller. He didn't get webbed hands or webbed feet or anything like that. You know, nothing miraculous happened other than the fact that he became super focused. Oh,
okay. So like, I'm thinking of multiple different ways that this presents itself from like the human experience. But I think one, we don't have the practice of like being that focused with our question asking. So like if I'm going to just look at marketing coordinator in this, usually a marketing coordinator, junior position, right? Very commonly come into an organization and people tell you what to do. And you get very good at being told what to do, but you don't get very good at asking questions about whether or not you should do those things or how those things contribute, because I'm a junior marketer. Who am I to ask those questions? And again, it's one thing when it's your sports psychologist asking you the question and your goal is to become an Olympian, versus when you're a marketing coordinator and you think you don't have the space to do that. But I think then too, there's kind of like a culture component of that, because I would say that I'm an athlete as well. And so like, I would say in sport, there is more of this focus on being a champion of performance, of like, I'm here to win. I am not here to play a whole bunch of basketball games and lose. I'm here to be the city champion. Like, what does it take for us to be city champions? And interesting too, we don't have to spend too much time on it, but just kind of to like throw in the team dynamic perspective on that, right? Like in
Mhm.
basketball, it doesn't really matter if I'm world class and the rest of my team is garbage, right?
Yeah.
Like we are a team. What does it look like for us to be world class? Might look like what's different than what it looks like. What a breaststroker needs to do is different than what a butterfly
Mm.
swimmer needs to do, right? Like it's not the same thing. Yet we get in the marketing sense all programmed into we just need to do the same thing and we need to track the same things and we need to report the same things and we need to do all of those things more times. We need to create more posts and more conversations and more because sales wants more leads and all of these things. But then again, like the more we keep adding more,
Yeah.
the easier it is to dilute the focus. And unless we're going to have the focus to stay focused,
Mm.
then I mean, it's no wonder that most marketing departments are floundering around doing a bunch of stuff and not knowing what 50% of it works.
Yeah. And, you know, we were talking about liberating time and headspace.
Yes.
I ask the same sorts of questions in businesses a lot. How much of the things that you do on a daily and weekly basis actually contribute to your two lengths of the pool?
Mm-hmm.
And most people will say, I don't know, maybe at best it's 50-50, but I'm probably a bit more like Chris, the swimmer, was. 2/3 of it doesn't, only a third does.
Right.
And I agree with you about the 100%. I don't think 100% is possible or realistic.
Mm-hmm.
Arguably, Chris didn't get to 100%. But if we just take a standard week, if we liberated 10%, 10%, so we're not talking about going from a third to 100%. We're just talking about getting 10% back. That's half a day a week.
Mm-hmm.
If we got 20% back, we've got a whole day a week.
That's a lot of
Imagine how
time.
powerful that would be for people. How
Mm-hmm.
much could you, if somebody said, there you go, you've got another extra half day a week, what are you going to do with it? Now, this is the other real challenge for people. When for example, when I do exec coaching work, finding 2 hours in somebody's day every day is not difficult. The challenge is not filling it with the stuff you just took out,
Right.
not doing more emails or attending more meetings that you shouldn't have been in the first place or whatever. Don't replace it with the stuff we just took out.
Right.
Find something more valuable
Mm-hmm.
to use that time on.
Yeah. Well, and I think the interesting thing about that too is that how you use your time is also a contributor in that, right? So let's say right now you spend 8 hours a day. I mean, I know CEOs who spend 12 hours a day, just like flat out working, right? Just
Mm.
work all day, no time, right? No break, don't eat lunch at their desk, like all of these things. And so if there's, let's say, 2 hours of time that you quote unquote get back into your day, I think again, our practice is to fill it with something, right? I should fill it with something that's quote unquote productive.
Yeah.
But we also have this limiting belief of what is productive. And so, earlier, well, last year now, because we're in 2025. I know it's almost the end of February. I'm still getting used to it. But like I started walking in the morning and I was like, I'm going to do 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, this feels so good, this 20 minutes. And now I do an hour in the morning, 60 minutes just of walking. And so if you asked the version of Tracy 5 years ago, if it would be productive for me to use an hour of my time every day to walk, I'd have been like, no, I would do that if I have time for it. But what I didn't realize until I started practicing it as something that was productive is that it allows me to start my day in flow. It helps my ideas start going. I feel like I've accomplished something. So I address the rest of my day as like accomplished. There's a lot of mindset things that it does for me. And again, from a work, now, yeah, that's my personal time in my day that I use to do that. But I think a lot of times from that working hours perspective, we think, again, maybe it is the 8-hour workday that like I'm supposed to chock a block this time full of things. And so we go and look for things to fill the gap, and things present themselves to fill the gap.
Yeah.
But if we have that time to, again, like maybe we call it strategy time, maybe we call it mindset break, maybe we call it what you want. But really what it is like a gap of time that's not assigned to something that the general working population would define as quote unquote productive. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Really what I'm saying is like space to think instead of just do.
Yeah. And the irony, of course, is that when the world flashes past your window at 100 miles an hour, the instinct is you can't possibly step away and think. You haven't got time for that.
Right.
And yet it's the most important thing you need to do in that moment.
And so interesting too, I don't know if like you've experienced this, Simon, or if any of the listeners that have experienced this as well. I experience it quite often now. And I'm experiencing it today, where I was like, you know what? I need time today to do this. My one thing. I do not have time today. The way my schedule turned out, I do not have time. So I'm going to make time to do that thing. And it was really interesting because I took a step to like move a thing, and then someone else was like, oh, I can't do this today. And so what I thought was me creating an hour actually ended up being 2 hours of to do the thing that I needed to do. That when I looked at my calendar today, my calendar would have said, nope, you don't have time for that today. And I think, again, like it's a practice, though, I would say, just like a lot of the things we're talking about, is that unless you start practicing creating that space, or even like, I love the 3 lists because it gives you like a very actionable, like you're doing a thing. So maybe it like meets the criteria of not having empty time. But like, years ago, I read the book, The One Thing. I don't know if you read it. We've probably talked about this. I reference it a lot on the show. But like the central question of which is, what is the one thing I can do right now so that all other things become easier or unnecessary? And that doesn't mean, like, just like in the swim example, it doesn't mean you get rid of all the things. It doesn't mean you don't train, right? Like you do have to train. But like, what can I do so that like I'm doing more meaningful things on an ongoing basis? Maybe it's a walk. Maybe it's an exercise like the 3 lists. Maybe it is asking a question. Right?
Yeah.
Like, why am I lifting this way if I need to go like this?
Yeah.
And finding the space and the confidence to be able to ask those questions, because the question also innately slows you down. Right? If I'm just like powering through stuff, probably not asking a lot of questions. If I am asking a question, it makes me slow down. And just like in your example, there's probably things a lot of other people can learn too. I'd be like, oh, wow. Yeah. Why do we do that? Actually, you really don't need to do that.
Yeah. I mean, the other interesting thing about this, and I reflected with Chris the swimmer on this, because his personality is he's the kind of person, he loves variety. He gets bored easily, and we were talking about focusing for a long period of time consistently on doing simple things better and better and better.
Right.
And to do that, his curiosity had to be directed within the task. Find things within the task, not outside.
Right.
So actually, when I look at focus and motivation, they are very, very closely linked, because focus follows interest follows what you care about. If you're not really interested in what you're doing, it's really hard to focus on it and be curious about things within it. You've got to really want to do the thing.
Right.
And you've got to want to do it really well.
And
you've got to care about it.
Yeah.
So motivation is absolutely critical to get your focus right in the first place.
Right.
Or else when the phone goes bleep, you think, oh, thank God for that. Any excuse to get away from the document I'm writing or the content I'm creating or whatever it is, because anything will distract you.
Right. Well, this is actually really interesting from a branding point of view, because when we think about brand as like the experience that we're creating for people, there is lots of people are referring to it as employer brand right now, which just means the brand that people who might be employees of your organization see. Really shouldn't be your brand should be the same for all the people perceiving it, but that's a conversation for a different day. If we're talking about like employer brand, what we're showing to the world so that the world wants to come and work here. It's really interesting to look at the value that focus can have in that activity. Because if you're attracting team members and your goal as an organization is to grow, which means by default, you will need to add team members in order to facilitate that, then really what we want is people who have their own like areas of interest. Accounting and marketing are very different, but like within the focus of the business. But then the business has to understand what its focus is. Otherwise, they can't hire people into that focus because they don't have that clarity. So, like, and I know we're kind of talking about focus at the starting point here, but what are some of the things you've seen or some of the questions that need to be asked in order to determine what is the right focus for you?
So when I look at this this little method around understanding your two lengths of the pool, your job in the simplest possible terms, that's something that we could collectively ask about our business. What's our two lengths of the pool? And then we could ask, if we wanted to break it down, if we were a large organization, what's this team's version of that? What's that team's? What's that team? So what's the finance team's version, and what's the marketing team's, and what's the sales team? And then we could probably see that if everybody did their jobs really, really well, we'd achieve ours.
Right.
And within that team, we could then ask, okay, so what's your two lengths of the pool? What's yours? What's mine? If I do mine and you do yours and you do yours and you do yours, we're going to perform really well, aren't we?
Right.
And so we can probably start to find our own personal focus that contributes to our team, and understand that when we all collectively perform as a team and all of the other teams do that as an organization, we start to perform really well too.
Right.
Going back to how motivation and focus are integrally connected with each other, just understanding the value that you bring and how your contribution makes a difference is really motivating for a lot of people.
Right.
What's demotivating is thinking, I've got a bunch of tasks and a jobs list, and I don't really understand where it fits in, how it contributes, what value it brings. It's just stuff.
Right.
It's just stuff that I've been asked to do. So, all right, fine, I'll do stuff, and I'll turn up in the morning, I'll go home in the evening, I'll do some stuff in between, and you're going to pay me. Okay, fine. That's not an engaged, motivated person. That's kind of like a biological robot. It's just going to churn out stuff.
And honestly, it might be worse than a robot in that scenario, because it has emotions and it has the ability to be burned out. And if you just want someone to churn through stuff, it's also interesting that you say that, because there's a lot of conversation in marketing about AI, and we just did an episode on this show about AI last week. And like, this is what if you have a super disinterested marketing coordinator creating a bunch of content for you, then yeah, you might as well use AI, because at least they're not disinterested. They're just a robot, right?
Yeah.
They're neither interested nor disinterested, but they're not actively disinterested. They're just but what if is that what we're trying to create? I don't think that's what we're trying to create, if we were really being honest with ourselves. But again, I think, and I don't know if I mostly see marketing, so I don't know. I'm sure this is happening in other departments equally as much, but like, there's so much volume of stuff that people are trying to do in marketing that you can't be focused. You can't even pay attention to whether or not your employees are motivated or not motivated. Depending on the culture of your organization, you may or may not care if your employees are motivated or not motivated. But I think the biggest gaps here are that if you do care that your employees are motivated and you don't know if they are or not, then again, let's ask the question, right? Like, if we are not faking it, if we do actually believe in that, how can we figure out? Is that an important contributor to our true lengths of the pool? And if it is an important contributor, how are we observing that? How are we influencing that? How are we creating space for that to improve? Because if we're not, it won't just happen. This is not, no magic going around here. Right? A magician with his magic wand just being like motivated. And I know, Simon, too, in the work that you do, that there's no like flat inputs for motivation either, right? Like not all people are motivated by the same thing. And so we can't necessarily just be like, we're going to pay you all the money and be like, poof, everyone is motivated, especially if we haven't done a good job with our employer brand attracting those kinds of people. So do you want to talk a little bit about that from the like how we can observe what types of things might motivate people and then what we might be able to do in terms of action to actually ensure that they stay motivated?
Yeah. And whilst there isn't one thing that motivates everybody, equally, there aren't hundreds either.
Right.
And it took me a long time to realize this, because I started, if you asked a bunch of people, if you had a dozen people and you said, what motivates you? You can get a dozen different answers, but they're not all different.
Right.
You probably haven't got a dozen answers. You've probably got a handful of answers. And I started to realize that actually all of the answers I've ever heard, and I've been asking this sort of question for years, and I've asked it hundreds of times, all the answers actually fell into 4 categories. So, and I described that motivation is pear-shaped. P stands for purpose. So there are some people who really care about what they do, the impact it has, the difference it makes. Sometimes they realize that what they do actually changes lives. One of my clients, they're a marketing agency, and they're in a space where they work with lots of health-based organizations. They work on campaigns that drive social behavioral change. So for example, to help people stop smoking and stuff like that. So, and they realize that actually what they do does have a real positive impact on society, a very real, tangible, positive impact, and they do change lives. Lots of those people are very, very purpose driven. So, and there are lots of organizations and lots of people who really do care about what they do and they understand the importance of it. So that's P for purpose. E is for enjoyment. And there are lots of people who want to really enjoy what they do. And it might not be the tasks. Some people do enjoy the tasks. Some people say, well, yeah, not really the tasks, not particularly, but I really enjoy the team I work with. Some people say the task isn't necessarily fun, but I love the fact it's challenging. It's challenging, it's stimulating. I know lots of engineers who hate easy challenges. They only want the difficult stuff. So there are lots of people who are engaged by the challenge, or they love the clients that they work with, or they love the human interaction bit, or they love variety, or they love the fact that they get to flex their creative muscles. So there's elements of enjoyment in it for people, and lots of people are motivated by that. A is for ambition and achievement. So this is the understanding that we are really good at this, or I might be really good at this. You might be good at this. We derive a lot of motivation from that feeling of mastery that we get, and sometimes it kind of can be recognized, but often it's just that understanding that I'm good at this. We're good at this. We might even be the best. We might be the number one in our marketplace, but sometimes it's just that we're getting better. and that we're improving, we're progressing, that you've probably seen those people who are just really hungry for development and progression.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the achievement ambition pillar. And the last one is recognition and reward. And when I share recognition and reward, most people go, oh, that's the dollars and cents bit, isn't it? Yes, it is, partly. Although for some people, the recognition bit is actually more powerful than the reward bit.
Mm.
And often this actually changes during people's lives as well. There are periods of a human being's life in Western society, particularly, where we're probably a little bit more focused on the money because we haven't got very much. And then maybe times in our lives where we're thinking, okay, we're quite comfortable now. The money's less important now.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of people, the recognition, awards and things like that, they're really important. Just a pat on the back, sometimes a thank you can go an awful long way. So the recognition and reward pillar is the fourth one. And a bit like personality profiling, we're not motivated by one or the other. We're actually all motivated by all of them, but to different degrees.
Right.
So somebody might be really purpose driven, not particularly reward orientated. Enjoyment's quite important to them. Achievement's really quite important to them as well. So there's a profile that you can start to build up.
Mm-hmm.
And when I share this with business leaders, that there are a few ways that this can be really useful. You can understand your own, which is useful. You can understand your people on an individual basis, and that helps you to motivate them. It also shows you that they might not be motivated in the same way you are.
Right.
So, and lots of leaders fall into the trap of thinking if it motivates them, it must be motivational for everybody. So if you're motivated by rewards, you think everybody else is as well. Or if you're motivated by being number one, you imagine that everybody else would care about that too. They probably don't, is the answer.
Right.
But the real sort of secret sauce in all of this is that we can create an environment that's motivational for everybody by making sure that we build 4 strong pillars. This is an organization that really works if you're purpose orientated, or if you're enjoyment, or if you're achievement, or if you're recognition and reward. It really doesn't matter. We've got all of that here.
Right. And I think too, like from the concept of our show title today, becoming a world-class marketer, I think even in just that understanding about yourself, what motivates you, can be very eye-opening from that perspective of the things we were talking about earlier, focus and how we get to those tasks and how we avoid being overwhelmed with just doing a bunch of things. Because I always think that I used to do this exercise with my employees called the love-loathe list. And it's very similar to the like what works and what doesn't, but from a love and loathe perspective. So like, what are the things that I love? What are the things that I loathe? There's a whole bunch of things that fall into the middle. But if we can get good clarity on what it is that we love and loathe, then we have the opportunity to do more things that we love and less things that we loathe. If we don't have the clarity, then we don't have the opportunity there. And in doing these types of exercises and even asking yourself today as you're listening to this, right? Like, what would I say motivates me the most? What would I say motivates me the least? It's like interesting for me because I've always been like, when I left corporate, I was on this like trajectory of like almost quitting, and then my boss would give me a raise and I'd be like, okay, well, that's pretty good money, so like I'll just go with that. But I got to the point where I was just like, okay, this reward now is not like counterbalancing my desire for purpose, and I need to go and find that. And my path is my path. It's not the right path for other people necessarily, but like that was based on what motivates me. And I just felt like so unmotivated, and I'm not the type of person who likes to be unmotivated. Likes to be motivated. But also in that, I've probably shared this on this show before, but I had this experience in my corporate life where I was reporting on a whole bunch of KPIs that I didn't think mattered and blah, blah. But I also got to manage people, and I love coaching people and training people. And I remember having this mindset shift one day from like, here's all the things I have to do that I hate doing to like, here's the one thing I get to do that I love doing. And so it didn't mean that I didn't have to do the other things. I did have to do the other things, but I got to focus my intention and my energy on the thing that I loved, that felt purposeful to me. And it wasn't enough to keep me in that scenario, but it made a big difference in the interim while I figured out what I was going to try and do. And so I think as we start to like wrap this up, because we've talked about a lot of things, like what it looks like to become a world-class marketer, I think there's an opportunity for people to take some time, whether that is in their workday, if they can find it right now, or not, but to take the time to just explore. What are the things? Maybe it's the activities that Simon mentioned. Like, what are the things you do that you know work? What are the things you do that you know don't work? Okay? Could you talk to your manager and tell them that, right? Or could you collect data to make sure you feel like you need evidence? Can we collect data for that to like demonstrate that? There are opportunities when we slow down and we actually look at, okay, well, if it takes focus, desire, and freedom to become world-class, could I say I have focus? Would I say I mean, everybody has desire, but are we tapping into that desire? And I'd like to wrap up the conversation with the concept of freedom, because I think there's a lot of times too when people, I mean, since the prevalence now of digital careers, there's a lot of people who talk about freedom, working from the beach, and like all these different types of things. But Simon, when you say freedom, what do you mean?
I mean freedom to try, freedom to fail, freedom to take a risk, freedom to push yourself outside of your comfort zone, freedom to make mistakes, freedoms to let the brakes off. That's really what I mean by freedom, because so many people, I often describe our ability to release what I call the mental handbrake. Lots of people have got their mental and emotional handbrake tugged on, and if you look at how that sort of thinks and feels, people often operate well within themselves because they're scared of what they might look like.
Right.
You know, why don't people, without maybe having a few too many beers or glasses of wine or whatever, why don't they just get up and dance? Well, because I'll look stupid and everyone will laugh. Why don't they just sing at the top of their lungs? Well, because I can't sing a note and everybody will laugh and talk about me. And it's this that becomes our mental and emotional handbrake.
Right.
What would my boss say? What happens if it goes wrong, etc. And so we never ever get anywhere near our potential.
Right.
We're always operating in the safe zone. So the ability to play free, and in sport we talk about just go and play, and it's really unusual in even in sport where we use the word play a lot, and people are called players. Often they're not playing, they're performing,
right,
or they're trying to get a result. And actually what we need them to do is to play. Play like you did when you were a 6-year-old. Play like it doesn't matter. You know, that kind of play. Be expressive, be creative. And bizarrely, for a lot of people, the thing that maybe unlocks that is actually courage. There's a little book by an existential psychologist philosopher called Rollo May, and it's called The Courage to Create. And I read this when I was studying and years ago, and it's only a tiny little book in a red cover, the one that I've got. And I read it and I read it and I read it and I read it again, and I thought it's brilliant. For me, though, if I was writing this book, I'd probably change the title to The Courage to Publish. Because he's talking about the courage that you need to put something that's probably a part of your heart and soul out there into the world to be judged. And that's the creative act, isn't it? If we're truly creative, whether we're writing poetry or music or writing a book or whatever it is, that's what we're doing. We're saying, look, there's this thing that's coming from inside me. It's got my emotion bound into it. It's got my thinking. It's an expression of me, all of that. And I'm going to put it out there into the world. What happens if people don't like it?
Mm-hmm.
What happens if they laugh at it? What if they tell me it's rubbish? I'm not going to take that risk. I just won't release it.
Yeah.
And so we've got all this brilliance that never sees the world, never sees the light of day, because of this fear. That's another expression of our mental handbrake being tugged on. So freedom is the ability to put the handbrake to the floor and just go.
And I think this is so important, because I've talked about this from a leadership perspective a lot of times, is that as a leader, you can do what you can to create the space for that. But at the end of the day, every single person is pulling their own mental handbrake. Like, I can't force you to let go of your mental handbrake. You have to let go of your mental handbrake.
Yeah.
And so while I'm not saying that leaders shouldn't do the work behind creating the spaces for those types of things, for belonging and psychological safety and all of those things, at the end of the day, each individual person is holding on to their handbrake. And if we don't have the courage to let go of that, if we don't have, from a marketing perspective, some of the things that come up for me are like, we don't have the bravery to do something different than what our competitors are doing. We don't have the courage to ask this question about this task that we're doing that we know is useless, right? I can't make you do that. And even if I want to learn it, I need you to do that. And so I think it's a great opportunity when we think about this concept of freedom, of, again, using it as a reflective practice of what is making me feel like I can't do that. And is that actually a real thing? Like, is it really, is it that my manager is going to judge me? Is it that XYZ? Or is it that I'm kind of afraid? And I'm trying to find a reason to rationalize my fear. And when it comes, it's funny. I think I've shared this on the show before too, but it's like my favorite experience ever with my son. And he was 4 at the time. We were going to preschool and he didn't want to go into the room. And I asked him, I'm like, what's making you afraid? And he's like, I don't know. 4-year-olds, they don't know. I think a lot of adults don't know either. But I asked him, do you think we could practice being brave today? Brave is about doing something in the face of fear. It's not about not being afraid. It's about doing things when you're scared. And he took a moment, very wise. Kids are so wise.
Yeah.
He thought about it seriously. And he was like, yes, we can practice being brave today. And he grabbed his lunch kit and went into the classroom. And I was like, that's like the best example of bravery ever. So thank you, Nicholas, because I use it constantly. But that's the point, right? And for us to be able to say that to ourselves, if we have people in our corner that can help us with that, that's amazing. Coaches are great at that. Business peeps are great at that. But when we can ask ourselves, like, I'm like pretty afraid of this. Can I practice being brave today?
Yeah.
Let's go do it.
If we start kind of digging under the surface a little bit, and you were talking about what are we scared of really? I think it's a really good question. When people say that they're scared of failure, I always draw a distinction between failing and failure. They're not the same. Failing is trying something that doesn't work.
Right.
Failure is usually how we see ourselves as a result. So, because we never say the words "I am a failing," we say "I am a failure." So we've kind of reflected that back into our identity.
Right.
If I fail at this thing, I see myself as a failure.
Right.
Well, we don't have to. We could fail at the thing and go, I'm still pretty happy with me as a person. I didn't become a worse person because I tried something and it didn't work. It's not that I'm going to be a failure forever in everything that I do, or I've just confirmed my worst belief that I'm a failure as a human being because I tried something that didn't work. We've got a choice, an element of choice in there, and we can separate those two. But I think people become scared of failure because they roll those in together and say, if I fail at the thing, I'm failing as a person.
Right.
And so fundamentally, what gives us the ability to say, I'm just going to give it a go. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't, is that we already feel good enough.
Right. Yeah. Because we're not like judging the outcome against our identity or our value as a person.
And I don't need this to work to feel good about myself. I'm pretty happy with me anyway.
Yeah.
If it works, great.
Yeah.
If I screw it up, big deal.
It makes me think of the Canadian men's sprinters in the last Olympics, which you probably know, but for the people who are not athletes and following, all of the top male sprinters for Canada, a couple of which were expected to medal in the individual races, didn't even make the final. And you were like, what? Oh man, come on, guys. Then they came back as a relay team.
Yeah.
Won the gold medal.
And they were good.
Yes. But that doesn't happen because the relay came after they quote unquote failed in all of their individual races. If you went into that relay believing that you were already a failure, you don't win the gold medal in the relay, right? This is the example of what it looks like to fail at a thing and not interpret that as a failure on yourself. And in marketing, I try to frame this for all marketers, especially for people who are not marketers, for entrepreneurs. Marketing fails more than it works. Yeah. And it's an ongoing process to figure out what works, to move things from that maybe into the yes category. And it's not a huge percentage of things that are in the yes category. It's actually a very small amount. And so when we're innovating and experimenting, and we're going to get stuff wrong. I've done full campaigns that were a complete waste of money, didn't turn into any business and cost us money. So and I've actually done polls on the show, like every single marketer has. Okay? There's no marketer who's out there that's like, I have a 100% record of only doing things that work. If you have that, then you are not trying new things. And I don't know that I'd want those people in my camp. But we will eventually, if we're trying stuff, if we're trying to learn, if we're trying to grow, if we're trying to improve, if we're trying to hit our optimum potential, which you referenced earlier, Simon, then we are going to fail at stuff. We're going to lose a race. We're going to pull a muscle. We're going to things are going to happen. But also things that can lead us closer to that are going to happen. We're going to identify what exercises we don't need to do. We're going to identify where we can get some time back. And in that process, we continually iterate closer and closer to that highest potential. And if we don't believe that we can do it, then our desire to iterate is probably pretty low.
Yeah. And so probably a good point to finish on is a myth. And it's a myth that I learned. So you asked right at the beginning, how do we become world-class? The myth is that world-class performers fail less. The truth is they fail far more than the rest of us because they're always pushing themselves, stretching themselves, getting out their comfort zone. And if it was a world-class squash player, I think she was number 3 in the world, said to me one day, she said, when I stop making mistakes and I stop failing, I get worried. That's when the alarm bell goes off in my head because it means I'm not pushing myself hard enough.
Yeah. And I would love to specifically let that sit with any of the more junior people who are tuning into our episode today, because the way you get to be these experienced people is by doing stuff. It's not by doing a very small amount of things over and over and over and over and over in exactly the same way. Right? And while I think a lot of times we assume that is what practice looks like I can shoot a free throw 100 times, a million times from a basketball point of view, and then my body gets the rhythm of it. But there is a lot more to the game than a free throw. And if my free throw shooting average makes no overall impact on the rest of the team, then I can shoot a lot of free throws and spend a lot of time doing that and it's not necessarily going to be visible from a quote unquote performance point of view. Okay, I'm gonna wrap it up there because we could actually like keep talking about this all day. Simon, if people are interested in learning more about what it looks like to become world class, where is the best place for them to find you?
Come find me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'd love to say hello. And you'll probably hopefully pick up most of the stuff from the profile.
Yes, and like always a good way to spend time in conversation with Simon. So highly recommend it. If you saw him here on the show, just like let him know that's where you saw him, and then he'll know kind of what you know about him in advance. I also want to thank Sanya for joining us in the chat. It's always great to see people resonating with the conversation. So thank you so much for sharing that. And with that, everyone, we will see you on the next episode of Crazy Stupid Marketing. And until then, permission to do you. Have a great one, everyone.